Greetings, clarinetists. This month has been New Music Month at the ICA, with an outstanding New Music Weekend hosted by the ICA New Music Committee, which had wonderful performances, lectures, and presentations. In the spirit of new music and new music collaborations, I reached out to clarinetist Andy Hudson and composer Roger Zare, whose collaborations have spilled out into the clarinet world, most recently with a delightful book called Elements of Contemporary Clarinet Technique. In this interview, they speak about their many collaborations, their approach to composing and performing with contemporary techniques, mindset, starting creative collaborations, and so much more. It was truly great getting to hear their perspectives and experience their enthusiasm for these topics. I really enjoyed it, and I really hope you do too. Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for joining me. Today I have Andy Hudson and Roger Zare speaking with me about contemporary techniques and the ways that we learn them. I would love to take a moment and open up the space just for brief introductions. I'd like to start with you, Andy, if you could tell me a little bit about where you are and who you are.
Yeah, I'm Andy Hudson. I'm assistant professor of clarinet at UNC Greensboro in North Carolina. I'm also the ICA state chair for North Carolina, which I love. That's great to be part of the ICA. And I'm really excited about sharing about contemporary techniques with my favorite composer, Roger Zare.
Thank you so much, Andy. Yeah, I'm Roger Zare. I'm a composer. I currently teach composition and theory at Illinois State University, and originally from Florida. I love composing, and for the last 10, 15 years or so, I've been writing more and more for clarinet. And I love what I can do with that instrument. So thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming. So I want to start off just talking about, because I know that you both have done a lot of collaborative projects, and right now it's New Music Month for ICA. So I want to talk a little bit about that collaboration, how you all met, and what things you've done previously.
So at the Clarinet Fest in California in 2011, I was giving a quartet recital, and the night before my recital, I went to hear the wind ensemble play with the soloists, and I heard many great performances that night, but there was the world premiere of a brand new concerto on that performance. The brilliant Alexander Fitterstein was soloing and premiering this new concerto by a composer that I had never heard of, Roger Zare. And it was like 30 seconds into the first movement that my quartet and I are looking at each other and they're mouthing to me, "We got to get him. We got to find him." And if I remember correctly, this piece was right before intermission, and we sat in awe while Alex Fitterstein played the crap out of Roger's concerto, Bennu's Fire, and the ensemble was terrific. The piece is dazzling. I've actually played the second movement of that piece, the Phoenix Song, which is also a standalone piece, many times, and we cornered is a strong word, but that's what happened. We approached Roger in the lobby at intermission and sort of cornered him against this glass wall before he could get away, and we all but begged him, like, we have to work with you. Your music is electric and fresh and interesting, and we've never heard anything like it. And we just said, would you please come to our recital tomorrow and see what you think? And thankfully he came out.
Well, I love going to festivals like Clarinet Fest. All those conferences are great for composers because there's so many premieres and so much new music on every program. So for me, I'm not a clarinetist myself. I play piano and violin and kind of come from the outside. I love going to those and just finding all the new pieces and feeling like it's a new music conference, actually, to me. I'm not going to the exhibit hall to try out clarinets, but instead I'm going to as many recitals as I can and meet as many people as I can. So I was really excited to meet this quartet, 10th and Broadway, and go to their recital the next day. I'm glad the timing worked out that I could go, and I was blown away by how Andy and his quartet sounded. So we got talking right afterwards about collaborating, and the piece that I wrote for them, LHC, I wrote about a year later, and went up to Columbus where they all were to hear the premiere and work with them. It was a great collaboration. You ended up premiering it at UNCG, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a crazy story. I had forgotten about that, and when I interviewed for my job at UNCG and went in the recital hall, I was like, I've been here. Oh, right. I premiered Roger's piece right here in this hall.
Small world.
It was, yeah, the piece was incredible. Actually, I've had several student groups play this piece in the years since, and LHC is it's a really special piece. It's got everything a clarinetist could possibly do. It's got impossibly delicate soft playing and virtuoso flourishes and loud and high and soft and high and loud and low and soft and low, and it's an incredible achievement for the quartet because it sort of breathes organically. It sort of exists in this tense space, much like the particles in the Large Hadron Collider, which it's based on. And one thing that Roger and I found out early was that we both are kind of geeky about science and philosophy, and we're sort of interested in the meaning of everything and where things come from. And so when he pitched us the idea of the piece, we're all on Google trying to figure out what the LHC actually is. And actually, a few years later, the Donald Cinta Quartet played a version of LHC at the Large Hadron Collider. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing to be able to go to the place that inspired the piece in this case. Yeah, particle physics. From the earliest I can remember, I love studying science in addition to music. I remember taking an astronomy class, and I'd loved astronomy before that, and just like digging into it was so eye-opening, just to put yourself in as little tiny grain of sand in this giant universe, puts you in your place. And so I love thinking of these big concepts, and there's so much amazing stuff that we're discovering out there that is just hard to wrap your mind around. And I love writing music that's about my excitement for those concepts. I sometimes try to take some of the math and work it in there, but most of the time it's just like the general idea inspires a piece. And so I wrote another piece called Z4430 a number of years later for the Cinta Quartet, actually, to premiere at the LHC. And this was based on another discovery that came out of the LHC. It's a 1 minute crazy kind of like firecracker of a piece, and made a clarinet quartet version that Andy premiered a few years later in Chicago. So fast forward many years, I think we were kind of, we remembered who we were. We weren't in constant contact between 2012 and about 2016 or 2015. So it was a few years. I was in Chicago. My wife was at Northwestern, and Andy was at Northwestern as well. And so I got approached by a physicist and a choreographer to do this project.
As one does.
Yeah, right. That just normally happens for me. No, it doesn't. This was a really special thing. They had come up with a whole dance show based on the physics of turbulence. And they had chosen some music that already existed, and it was okay for the first time they did the show, but they wanted to have some music that was more specifically geared towards the kind of shapes and science behind the dance for that show. So there was an article, like a short article about me in the local paper, that I talked about how I like inspiration from science in my music. And that got their thoughts going, and they contacted me, and it was the easiest yes for any kind of collaboration. Because it sounded so cool what they were doing. But it was a kind of weird. Normally I'm approached by musicians to write a piece for those musicians, and so I know what instruments I'm writing for. But this was a bunch of dancers and a physicist, and so they were like, well, you come up with what instruments you think would be best for this piece that would convey the ideas that we're talking about. And I originally was thinking of maybe one of the ensembles that was already in Chicago, Third Coast Percussion. They had some conflict, so it didn't work out. And then I thought, what other instruments could capture the kind of fluid dynamics that we were looking at? And I thought, hey, I know Andy Hudson, and he's in town, and some of the other members of 10th and Broadway were also studying at Northwestern at that time. So I reached out to Andy and said, hey, I've got this idea. What about a clarinet quartet about the physics of turbulence? And 10th and Broadway came back together.
We owe it to you. The reunion tour, some new stuff, some old stuff.
Yeah, it was amazing to kind of get to work with you again on this brand new thing. And the rest is history, because ever since then we've continued to collaborate. Like F Plus, the ensemble you founded it was clarinet, violin, and percussion. You just put that together, and you said, we don't have repertoire yet. So I took a piece called Lunation 1113 that was for bassoon, violin, percussion, and I made it into bass, clarinet, violin, percussion, and sent it to you. And I think it works better in that version. So
Well, I mean,
before I
everything works better for bass clarinet. I mean, I bet we
yeah,
played that piece 50 times. I mean, we
right.
memorized it, we played it all over, and it just, yeah, I'm so grateful that we reconnected because, I mean, I think everybody should play your music, but it was really, we just kind of started going and we never stopped going. We just,
Mhm.
didn't have to
Yeah,
get ready,
you
we were staying
inspire me
ready.
when you play my music so well,
Oh,
and you challenge me to write, music with more depth and more technical prowess. And so, it really gets me going to work with you. Just as I know you say that about working on my music.
and this is the reason that, like, middle of the first summer of the pandemic, when I was basically sitting around and I had no concerts. I mean, I don't know if behind me I have this whiteboard with all these lines of like concerts, and I keep track of my rep, and the whiteboard was empty. I had nothing to play. I was just practicing for fun. I was playing lots of scales and lots of music on my own, studies, etudes, pieces I hadn't learned before, and I was like, I need to do something creative. I'm missing that collaborative energy, and I can't see the people I care about. And my brother, Nathan Hudson, had just founded this new contemporary trumpet competition, the Next Generation Trumpet Competition. And he had commissioned all these modern etudes for the trumpet soloists to learn as the competition pieces. And some of them were really good. And Nathan had commissioned Roger. And I started thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool to have more contemporary clarinet etudes? I was like, man, somebody should do that. And then as I was sitting in my room alone for like the 10th day in a row of thinking that, I was like, maybe we could do that. And so I called Roger and I said, listen, I have this crazy idea and I'm guessing you're not busy right now and I'm also not busy right now. So what if we put together a collection of modern etudes, and the rest is history. And then we spent 14 months of our life doing that.
So I want to interject really quickly, because I'd like to know just a little bit when you were thinking about that, and both of you agreed to collaborate on this. Why do you think it was important? What about contemporary technique etudes? Why was that a need for the clarinet world?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that there's so many great modern etudes already. I mean, there's so many great composers who are writing studies and pieces that do this, but I really think Roger is a special composer for the clarinet. I think Roger understands the instrument. For whatever reason, he is able to tap into like the soul of the instrument. And I think everybody should play his music, especially clarinetists. But then there's also, I was encountering in my own practice that, Robert Spring, mentor of mine, friend of mine, who I love, says that the things that used to be extended techniques are now just techniques. And I have great etudes to work on my legato. I have great etudes to work on my technique facility in certain keys. And I was wanting to improve as a circular breather, and I was wanting to improve as a slap tonguer, and I was wanting to improve with my multiphonics. And I was wanting a resource that helped me do that. And then I was thinking that maybe other people would also be interested in that. And so for me, the idea that we could create a collection of concert etudes of pieces that could be performed, but also that would kind of guide you through the techniques was exciting to me. And I had kind of specific things that I wanted to work on that we sort of based the etudes around. It's kind of selfish, but I would say to Roger, like, hey, I struggle with this in this technique. Could you write an etude that addresses that? I
That was really
mentioned.
good. It was good because I don't play clarinet. That's not my instrument, but I understand the clarinet from writing for it a lot and working with a lot of different clarinetists and great performers over many years. And so I wouldn't know what technique needs to be worked on or how to work on it. And so our discussions about that help focus me towards, how can I really actually develop my own writing too, to do more things with the clarinet than I even thought was possible. It was a lot of fun, breaking some of the things my tendencies that I normally do, because the etude was about some kind of technical aspect that needed to be more difficult than I would normally think a clarinet piece needs to be. Because it was about this challenge, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think for me, what was so rewarding was to collaborate with Roger all the way through. I mean, we had so much back and forth. I mean, he would draft an etude, I would take a look at it, we would talk through it, I would sort of show him this, this is what's hard about it. Here's what I'm doing to get around it. And there's sort of this exchange of ideas throughout, and always walking that line of making something really powerful and beautiful and artistic that's also teaching the technique. And then a big value of Roger's, I know, is just to create beautiful concert music that also pushes instruments forward. I know Roger's deeply passionate about progressing the instruments. I mean, Paganini did it for the violin, and I think Roger's doing it for the clarinet, where a piece by Paganini might have seemed impossible when it was written, and now everybody plays it. And there's such a precedent, for these etudes or for these concert works being progressive. There's collections of pieces that are not called etudes. Maybe Roger can actually talk a little bit about sort of the dirty word etude. This is a great story.
That was
Yeah, etude
question.
Right, etude is a loaded word depending on what instrument you play. So, like, I'm a pianist growing up. Violin was my second instrument, but I know of all these great concert etudes for piano. And so Chopin has 2 sets of etudes that are wonderful. Liszt has a whole bunch of etudes. Rachmaninoff has these etude tableaux, which are brilliant pieces of music and also work on techniques. And so just as a pianist, I'm used to etude not being a dirty word. But I was writing a piece for violin and cello, and it was a very conceptual piece, and I was thinking about naming it Etudes, because each of the pieces was a compositional etude of some sort. And I was talking to the 2 performers I was writing for, and the violinist and cellist said, no, don't use the word etude. When I think of etude, I think of all these note spinning things that I did when I was in a practice room as a student way back when, and it was just like pulling teeth to develop your technique, as opposed to making great music at the same time. So the etudes for violin that would be concert etudes are usually called something else, like caprice, in the case of Paganini, certainly. So that word etude, I really think of these as concert etudes. And we didn't name any of them etudes on purpose, because we want them to be real pieces of music that you can play on a recital, and no one's going to think, oh, that was a nice note spinning exercise. They're going to think, oh, that was a piece of music that tried to say something musically. And that's really important. So I eventually changed the title of that violin and cello duo. Yeah, for these, technique is important. I remember just being fascinated with pushing the technical bounds of instruments. And as violin is my second instrument, I tried playing some of those Paganini pieces. And I was never good enough to really perform them, but it taught me a lot about like how does technique work to be able to say more things with music than you would be able to without having that technique. And I think that just unlocks this door to new possibilities musically, and technically, certainly. And developing techniques in certain ways will help pieces that don't use those techniques as well.
Yeah, I was teaching a lesson this morning, working through an etude and challenging my student, who'd prepared very meticulously and played beautifully, but challenging him, how musically can you play? I know it's hard, but like we have to draw the music from it. And that was kind of the other half of the book, right? Because Roger wrote 21 etudes, and we have a guest etude from our good friend Viet Quang, and then each etude is paired with, it's almost like I'm giving a lesson. I sort of tried to write it down. So I give sort of like an introduction. So we named all the etudes after elements from the periodic table, because I know it's really geeky, but I can't stop being me. Roger can't stop being Roger. So I sort of write an introduction where I reflect on the theme of the etude. And I should mention that we agreed on the topics for the etudes, and then Roger wrote, and then when I interpreted, I did not ask him how he was trying to connect the theme to the etude, because I wanted to sort of excavate that myself. I take a lot of pleasure in sort of interpreting Roger's music, and so for me it was like a game, like trying to think what he would, and I got close on most of them, I think. But anyway, there's basically like a written overview of the techniques in the work. So and we start in a place of more standard techniques, more traditional techniques. So the first couple of chapters are about breath control, and then the next couple chapters are about slurring upward or downward, and then we move into less and less familiar territory. But for example, I sort of walk people through my process of ferreting out a multiphonic to get it to work, and there's a million ways to do this, and I can only tell the way that I do it. And I don't think I'm like the guru in this, but I thought that maybe someone would think it was helpful to have a guide, because you pick up the book and you look at the music, it's like, I can't play two notes at once. And my argument in the book is like, well, you can, and here's how I would do it. And I encourage people throughout the book, like, if what I'm saying isn't working, then take notes and try stuff, and let's figure out what might work for you. So there's sort of like an overview conceptually, and sometimes it's a few pages outlining how to think about a slur, and sometimes it's more in depth, like, this is how I approach the slap tongue as a technique. And there's a million ways to do that too. And then paired with that is like a play-by-play of how to work through the etude. So I sort of try to encourage people how they might succeed in the techniques, but also then musically, like, how should you phrase through this high note to make the phrase connect, or how might you deploy the technique most musically in measure 60 or whatever. And so my goal is that somebody could sit down with the book who plays the clarinet, and could at least have a starting place to excavate this really beautiful music. And I've been working through them with some of my own students, and I've gotten a lot of notes from people playing them, and I'm so grateful for the investment people are making in that process. Even if my approach might not be what ultimately gets them there, I want to tell them that there is a way to get there, and that I think contemporary music is for everyone. I mean, all music was contemporary when it was written, and I think I feel a responsibility to help people see the beauty in that, and like, I think Roger's music is going to be around forever, and I know he said many times that he doesn't really care about, but like, like, the musicologists can decide, fine, but like, I think it's our responsibility to help the masterworks of the future come into existence now, through helping composers create music, through championing the composers we believe in, through sharing with audiences that the works that we think deserve that place in the canon. I'm not looking to jettison the canon, I'm looking to expand the canon. I'm looking to see the canon 500 years in the future, and asking myself, like, what needs to be there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. I have two questions. One, I'll direct at Roger, and then I'll direct one at you, Andy, for composer and performer, but technically about mindset. So one of the things I really appreciate in any kind of studies is that the pieces themselves are standalone, that they're not just a study in something, that they could be, they're music that we can bring to life. And so I quite appreciated that. Can you talk to me a little bit, Roger, about the mindset of how to create that musicality in something, a standalone piece that's surrounded by a particular technique? What were the challenges, and how did you approach it?
Yeah, I think just starting with, how does the technical challenge then shape what musically can happen in the piece, but then prioritizing that musicality of what the piece is going to say. And so, like, for example, the multiphonics etude, I had all these strange sounds, and I'd actually not really written for multiphonics in the clarinet before I wrote this etude, Phosphorus, for this book. But I explored, what was possible, what are the limitations of the multiphonics, and then I started to notice some patterns, and I realized that some of these go together because maybe they have the same fundamental pitch, but they have slightly different overtones within them. And so musically, if you put them next to each other, then they're related, and you hear that, and it sounds like you're playing a chord progression as opposed to random noises. And using any kind of technique, especially weird ones, if I'm going to use a weird sound in a piece, I prioritize that there's a musical meaning for that sound. And if I can connect that sound with other weird sounds that are similar, then I've created a narrative, and the music starts to say something. And so every etude, I tried to do that, whether it was the multiphonics, there's like a high B that then all the parcels underneath it are changing to create like a chorale texture in some of that. Other etudes with the slap tongues, I use them to, create like a pointillist painting in that, because that's what it makes me think of when I hear those little percussive slaps. And every etude was a unique experience to write, because each technique that I was looking at was a little different what it suggested to me. But I think, having that limitation of, okay, this is going to be about something already, unlocks my creativity to how can I use all those different sounds within that one little tiny world to say something. How can I make it go from point A to point B and feel like it was inevitable that we got to point B at the end.
Oh, I love that it's inevitable to get to point B. That's wonderful. So Andy, I want to kind of twist that question about mindset. Because I know for me, even if I have mastered a particular technique, whenever I get a new piece that is utilizing it, sometimes it's I'm relearning how to apply this technique in new ways. As you were going through these etudes, or just in general, when you're performing any of this music, what is your mindset when you're approaching new techniques or techniques that you're applying in a new way? And how did you allow that mindset to filter into the etude book?
Yeah, I love that question. In the front matter for the book, I give kind of an overview for how I think about modern techniques. I give kind of like 5 principles for how we should engage with these techniques. And it's sort of like me trying to coach someone through the inevitable frustration which will come. And one of the things I encourage people to do is to stay really curious, is to sort of interrogate every situation. And one thing I learned during our collaboration with Dr. Elizabeth Hicks, the physicist, and Megan Rhyme, the choreographer, when we did that project back in 2016, we had this great exchange where we were sharing our creative processes. So Megan would share how she came up with the choreography, and then Dr. Hicks would share how she went through creating an experiment and what it looked like to tease it out. And Roger shared how he wrote music, and Brandon shared how he came up with design, and I shared about being a performer. And I was talking about how a lot of being a musician is, we all have this kind of like low-grade fear of failure all the time. Like, we're sort of taught that you win the audition or you don't, or you get first chair or you don't. The concert was good or it wasn't. And Elizabeth, the physicist, just couldn't understand this idea that failure was a bad thing. I finished sharing and she said, "That's really interesting." She said, "If I fail an experiment, I've done my entire discipline a service, because we know this doesn't work. And so I just have information, and then I can do something different, and I don't have to do this anymore. Like, this is great." Like she said, failure is actually like it's freedom. It's like, oh great, like I know that didn't work. That's awesome. And so every time she would fail an experiment, she would spend years on an experiment, it would fail, and she would just see it as like a brilliant doorway into the next thing. And I just realized that it's all about curiosity. It's like, oh, this didn't work. Like, I wonder what could make it work. And that actually that's the fun part of making music. And so, when I got these etudes from Roger, they really range in difficulty. Some of them are very approachable. I could give to a young student, and some of them are very difficult. Like, I will need hours to perform them. And I've performed some of these already, and some of them are really, really challenging for me. And it's really about sort of me interrogating my process. Like, what can I learn from this in this moment? I have this philosophy that performances are postcards. And so a performance is not a final event. A performance is a letter from where we are today and how it's going today. And for me, it's like getting into these pieces, it's like, I wonder how this is going to be today. And because Roger is such a good composer, if you played one of these etudes, like, so slap tonguing is a technique that a lot of people struggle with. I will just say out loud that it took me 4 years to learn how to slap tongue. So don't stop if you're trying. It's very frustrating, I understand. But the etude is written in such a way that if you played the etude and none of your slap tongues came out, it would still be an incredible performance. Like, if you played the phosphorus, the multiphonics etude, and half the multiphonics didn't come out, the etude would still be really beautiful. Like, if you had to take breaths in the moto perpetuo, the hydrogen, the circular breathing etude, it wouldn't kill the etude. And this is the genius of Roger's composition, is that the techniques are musical devices that enhance what's happening, but that it's not like a trick. It's not a gimmick. Like, it's not like, oh, this piece doesn't exist apart from the technique. It's like this technique is woven in. It's become subliminal, and it's become sort of all around us. And that's what I love so much about the book, is as I'm working through them, and I'm still working through them because I'm trying to get better at all kinds of things, the pieces really work because they're great pieces that happen to guide you through these techniques. And so I just encourage people, like be brave, like get in there and don't be afraid to fail. Like, I think about all the resources that my physicist colleague invested in her experiments just to say, oh, that didn't work. And now we know that doesn't work. Isn't that great? And just to continuously come back to the process. Like for me, the process is the outcome. It's all about exploring that musical journey and seeing what you might discover. And if the process is the point, well, then we're never going to be bored and we're never going to lose the fire for music making.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful, wonderful information. I hope my students listen to this. So I would like to kind of direct us to the collaboration and how people think about collaboration. I think these days, finding collaborations between performers and composers is so important, but it can also be sometimes rare. I think it's easy to just write something and easy to just perform something. Do you have any advice or thoughts about people who want to begin collaborations, either as composers or performers, about going about it? And what are some things to keep in mind as they're collaborating?
I think work with your friends first is a great place to start, because approaching someone you've never met before that's scary for anyone. But you probably know someone, especially if you're a student at a university. There are probably some composition students that you've interacted with in a class before. Just start by saying, like, what are they interested in? Get to know them as a person and not just as a musician, and that counts a lot too. The fact that Andy and I found out that we love science and we love nerdy things like that was a great connection, and it's been the driving force between a lot of our collaborations as well, and really fueled a lot of that. So I think once you get to know someone as a person, then it's not so much about just like we're doing work for each other, but we're growing in our musicality with each other. And we're getting to know each other better as people, instead of just we're writing notes and playing them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's where you start. You start with people and you build those relationships and you let creativity come out of that. And I think another great first step is to reach out to composers who are still alive, who wrote pieces that you're playing. So one thing I have my students do is if they're playing a piece by some composer who's alive, I'll just have them send an email to that composer. Like, hey, why don't you send an email? Like, I had a student playing one of Viet's pieces, Apparition. I said, why don't you send Viet an email and just, like buy your copy of the piece and just send him an email and thank him for his time. And they had this wonderful exchange with this great composer. And you start to realize composers are people and they like when the music is played and they're excited about it and they're excited that you're excited about it. And I think as you start to demystify the other side of it, it helps. And I'm sure the same is true of composers. Like it can feel intimidating if you want to approach a performer, like, hey, I wrote this piece. I'd like you to play it. Would you please play it? Or could I write you something? I just think you realize that most people, maybe not everyone, but most people just really want to exchange energy and ideas. And I think that getting that process going and recurring in that collaboration is really rewarding. So, I've worked with a lot of composers and I've premiered a lot of pieces in my life, and some composers I've played a lot of their music. I get to know them, and I believe in them. And now that I'm a teacher, I get to have my students play their music, and that's so rewarding to share a piece. I think we're about to be at our fourth performance in the clarinet studio here of Lita Fink's "If I Were Only Halfway Home," which is this bass clarinet solo piece I premiered a few years ago, and I just love the piece, and my students heard it and they loved it, and so they all get to know Lita, and they email her when they buy the piece, and she writes back and is nice to them, and I think that's really exciting. And our clarinet choir played Roger's insanely beautiful Mera Tranquillitatis at the clarinet conference last summer, and I had Joanna, my doctoral fellow who conducts it. She connected with Roger, and Roger coached us over Zoom, and it was so powerful for students to be like, oh my God, this famous composer, Roger Zare, he's on the screen being nice to us, thanking us for playing his music. Like, wow, why would he do that? And then they start to realize oh, they just composers are they're just people who want to collaborate, and we're growing as we're experiencing the art that Roger's made, and we're helping it come to life in a new way from our unique vantage point.
Great, thank you so much for that insight. I think this kind of information about composition and collaboration and how extended techniques don't have to be a gimmick, that they can be compelling, and the work that you both are doing and the collaborations you both are doing, the rest of us are benefiting a lot from it, the pieces that are coming out of it. So just a heartfelt thank you from the clarinet community. I'll speak for everyone. Yeah, so we're just about out of time, but I just wanted to kind of open it up to any final thoughts about extended techniques, etudes, composition, or collaboration. Are there any main things, if someone could take one thing away from this interview, what should it be?
I think I would encourage people to broaden your musical horizons. Like, enter into places where you are afraid, and learn to be comfortable, and learn to be not afraid of being afraid. Like, learn to be okay with that discomfort, because for some people who are watching this, maybe you're a contemporary player and you're afraid to play Mozart because you're afraid you're going to break it or something. It's like, oh, it's too precious and fragile. Like, I could never play this piece and do it justice. Like, that's just not true, right? Like, great masterworks become great masterworks because they hold up to interrogation and they hold up to interpretation. So great music can be pushed on and poked and it doesn't break. And so I would encourage you to really find those parts of your life, of your career, where you don't trust yourself yet, and push yourself into those spaces. And so for a lot of people, that is modern music. They hear that a piece is contemporary and they just immediately say, I'm not going to like that, or it's not going to be musical, or it's not going to be artistic. And it's just not true, of course, but it's also just important to notice that about yourself. Like, oh, I'm resistant to this whole world of music that I don't know exists. And maybe it's improvisation for someone is uncomfortable, or it's jazz, or it's any other subset. Maybe it's an auxiliary instrument or something. But really challenging yourself to dismantle that artificial strata you've created, and to just say, like, music is music, and I just want to know everything I can about all of it. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to just figure out, where is the space where you are hesitant, where you are afraid, where you're intimidated, and just know that you belong there, just like you belong where you are now, and that you can find beauty and growth in any space, and that our growth really happens in those liminal places where we are stretched just a little bit further than where we are now.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, embrace the discomfort that you find out there, because music is an infinite language. I think there's no limit to what music can say and what it can do, and it's a language too. It's something that you speak, and so you get more comfortable with speaking a language the more you speak it. And certainly, if you speak a language and leave out half the words, then you can't say a lot of things that would need those half the words. And contemporary music, just as jazz and just as any other style, just as Mozart in itself, those are all separate parts of this language that we are all trying to speak as musicians, whether it's me as a composer or you as a performer. And so the more that we know, the more experiences we have, the more informed we are, and also eventually those uncomfortable things will become more comfortable, and you'll find what speaks to you from those strange sounds that maybe you can use. Maybe you can say something with them, and maybe you can say something really meaningful with them that you just can't say if you didn't have that in your vocabulary.
And I think back to, that premiere of Bennu's Fire, where Alex Fitterstein, who is this dazzling player, is premiering this contemporary concerto. And he can play anything in any style with conviction and compellingly and with finesse. And I think that all of the great artists start to exist in all the spaces. We always think of Eric Mandat as a contemporary guru, which he is, but he's also like, he will mess you up with some Brahms. Like, it'll change your life. And I think that range of experience is so satisfying. And the secret is that the more you do in different places, the more those things cross-pollinate, and then every part of your artistic voice becomes more nuanced, more compelling.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me and chatting about contemporary techniques and musicality and collaboration. It's been a true pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.